This week on Motor Week, Richard Hammond drives the revised version of the Audi A4. Chris Goffey gets to grips with Chrysler's Plymouth Prowler. And Ginny Buckley is in Marbella to drive the BMW Coupe.
You have to feel sorry for them, really. Audi, I mean. They brought us all the way to Spain for the weather. But it's about a facelift for the A4, their most important car. It's their biggest seller by quite a long way and accounts for probably half of their sales in the UK year on year. So you've got to be very careful when you start playing around with a car like that. Perhaps that explains why it really is only a mild facelift. But not all of the changes are on the outside. There have been some made in here as well. Though not a lot. It's been limited mostly to small touches, things like the buttons, which are backlit and actually lifted from the A6. They have the same positive feel when you use them. And cup holders and the usual ergonomic sense that you would expect to find in the cabin of any Audi. In fact, it's starting to feel very familiar. There's a familiar feeling about the light and the colours and the quality of materials used that lets you know you're in anything from the Audi range. It's been quite a journey for our German chums, from purveyors of tedious, tweedy old nails whose only attribute really was, well, that they just wouldn't die. They've become the very epitome of cool, sharp style. The point at which excellence of design meets understated good looks to produce the motoring equivalent of, some fancy clothes designer whose name I'll probably never know, but you get the point. Chic and slick. So what's gone on? Well, quite a lot actually. Audi fought shy of making significant external changes to a car that's already selling well. Subtle, yes, but no less effective for it. The wide-mouth frog treatment at the front accentuates the grille and straight away gives the car something of a miniature A8 look. The new fog lamps set lower into the front spoiler are reminiscent of the A6 and also free up space in the headlamps for the higher discharge lamps. There are redesigned bumpers, new door handles and mirrors, new side rubbing strips and a reshaped boot lid that incorporates a flush, soft-touch grip. Safety features abound with ABS, electronic brake force distribution, front airbags, front side airbags and now an airbag isolation switch for the passenger seat. It means you can switch off the airbag and avoid injuries to children in safety seats in the front. And the prices, there's no big changes there really, starting at around 17.5 grand for the entry-level 1.6 and rising to just under 29 at Big Banane for the stonking 2.8 Quattro. There have been changes made under the surface as well, in the suspension, front and rear. Nothing too radical, the same basic layout is kept for the front and rear axles, but it has been slightly altered, though it doesn't make any appreciable difference to the drive nor to the ride. The engines do stay the same. There are 3 4-cylinder petrol engines, there's 2 V6s, one the TDI, and there's the 1.9 TDI as well. The Germans are not exactly a generous bunch. Okay, I know I'm a bit generalising here a little, well, a lot. But tightwads, really. Certainly as far as motor industry is concerned, BMWs and Audis are not renowned for giving kit away. If you want anything more than a wheel nut, it's going to cost you. But the interior trim level and the spec level has been upped a little. As with the A4 previously, it's a great drive. It is quite a small, compact car and it feels that on the road. Very capable. So capable as to be pretty bland, really. It's only when you've got the extra power that's available in the larger engine versions that you can really start to explore the handling. Before that, it's all extremely safe and predictable. Safety standards have been improved throughout the range as well. Airbags are now available to cover pretty much every surface. We've got them here at the top, at the side, and we've got them here on the front pillars, and obviously in front of both driver and passenger. Facelifts like this are very important to the motor industry. They give a manufacturer an opportunity to lift and refresh an otherwise already very popular model. And the facelift of the Audi A4 is a very good example of that. It is very important to Audi that it continues to work. Subtle though it may be, the changes made to it, I think, work. It does bring it into line with the rest of the range. I don't think they'll lose any of the loyalty that they've established so far, and maybe they'll build some more. And perhaps if it does anything, it does prove one thing. Vorsprung durch Technik, which, as I've always known, actually means if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I learned something the other day. I always thought hot rods were something that American teenagers built out of old Ford V8s. Not true. The term comes from the 1920s in Britain when a Rolls-Royce engineer was asked to develop a racing engine for an air race. And he got 1,500 horsepower out of an engine that had previously only developed 800. His name, Rodwell Banks, hence hot rod. This is a name that's much more familiar, Plymouth. and this is the Prowler. It's the only hot rod made by a mass manufacturer. When I say mass manufacturer, they're going to make 3,000 of these things, and Plymouth say there's currently 30,000 on the waiting list. So, why do so many people want a car like this? The answer, it's dramatic good looks. I mean, it really stunned the motoring press when it was first shown at the 1996 International Motor Show. Since then, only 3 have come into the country. This is one of them, and there's going to be no more either, because SVA, Special Vehicle Approval, simply will not cope with the way the lights, the bumpers and the front wings are organised on this car. And Chrysler, who make Plymouth, say they're not prepared to compromise and change the car just for British law. So this is as many as you're going to get. The concept is simple. You take the classic lines of the old American hot rod, an aluminium chassis, aluminium independent suspension front and back, a 3.5 litre V6 engine chucking out something over 220 brake horsepower, 4-speed automatic transmission, and there it is. The essence of the old hot rods was their simplicity, and despite its dramatic looks, the Prowler hasn't really changed any of that. So I remember seeing this at the 1996 show. I mean, how come you've got one here?
Well, I saw it at the 96 show as well. It was hanging up, if you remember, on some sort of racking. Fell in love with it there. And there's a friend of mine who deals in performance cars in Canada. I happened to be talking just a while ago and said, if you see a Prowler, can you get one for me? Expecting a 2-year wait. And a week later he came back and said he had one for me.
Is it a rude question to ask you what you paid for it?
Yeah, just a little.
A slight premium?
Yeah, just a slight premium. A big premium, a big premium.
Any trouble getting it to be legal on British roads?
Nothing major. We spent about £1,000 on it, on having the lighting altered and changed around, but nothing major, nothing major.
So David, the only one in the country, what's it insured for?
It's insured for £80,000.
And you're prepared to let us drive it?
Yeah, sure.
And it does go as you imagine an old hot rod Ford really would. It's quite funny looking into the eyes of drivers coming the other way as well, because they perceptibly widen as you come round the corner. Chrysler claim that this has European standards of steering, road holding and handling. Not quite sure where they get those European standards from. It's very light aluminium chassis, aluminium suspension and a composite body shell means the whole thing is very light, so even though it's a V6, it doesn't half go. This automatic transmission is interesting. It converts to a sort of slap shift and you can go up and down through the gears, just bashing it either way. Bit frightening on the move because with the left-hand drive here you simply cannot see that offside front wheel and the car's wider than you think. Now if you did come to the top of the waiting list in the States, you could drive away in your Plymouth Prowler for around £25,000–26,000. If you wanted to buy this, which is the only one in the country, it's £80,000. I know exclusivity comes expensive, but that's very expensive. Would I like one? Well, I have to say that a wet Monday in Essex doesn't really compare to a sunny day down the King's Road. But even so, can't resist one more drive.
Coming up after the break, the BMW M Coupe. Ginny Buckley travels to Marbella for a drive of this latest edition from the manufacturer's sporting division.
B, M and W. 3 letters that sum up the quality and performance you get from the pride of Bavaria. But of course, if it's real driving excitement you're after, then you'll be looking for an extra letter on the back of your BMW.
It is, of course, the letter M, telling you that this BMW has come from the company's motorsport division. Now, it no longer just looks after their racing interests, but in recent years has found a new hobby, tweaking and tuning your average BM and turning them into supercars.
First off the block for the ultimate in makeovers was the M3, hot on its heels the M5, one of the most extreme sports saloons ever. The 3rd generation M5 out next summer promises absolutely blistering performance, with its 5-litre V8 developing an incredible 400 brake horsepower and catapulting the 5 from 0 to 60 in 5.1 seconds.
But as I said, that's next summer. Let's get back to the here and the now, because these are the keys to a rather special BMW that carries the letter M. Now, from certain angles, you may well think you've seen this car before. The flare of the wheel arches, the swell of the bonnet could lead you to believe that this is the M Roadster.
But on closer inspection, you realise that this is in fact a very different beast. This is the M Coupe. The car to silence any of the critics who claim that the Roadster just wasn't butch enough.
The M Coupe is packed with more testosterone than you'd get on a night out with the Chippendales. And personally, I think its curves and bulges are far sexier than anything those lads have to offer. This is the kind of car you can't ignore.
Now, you may not be able to ignore it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll like it. But what you will do is have an opinion about it. It looks to me as though it's just escaped from a cartoon. The low-down, laid-back hot rod looks are pure Looney Tunes on acid. And yep, I reckon that BMW's design guru Chris Bangle had a fantastic time when he put pen to paper and came up with this one.
And while they may have very different bodies, the interior is definitely that from the Roadster. Gorgeous 2-tone upholstery that comes in some fantastic colours. Glorious curves that reflect onto the passenger side, and of course all the chrome and those little red needles that promise you hours of fun. Now in the Coupe there is of course plenty more room in the back for all your bags than you'd find in the Roadster, but rather unsurprisingly the space inside the cabin is exactly the same. It's not fantastic, but I don't have a problem with it. What I do have a problem with is the fact that the steering wheel isn't adjustable. Now, you're paying £41,000 for this car. I'll find that very annoying. It's one of those things that when you live with it could become a huge irritation.
But I still think it's gorgeous, and we haven't even got round to talking about the little letter M yet. And this is what you're paying the best part of 41 grand for. The tinkering and tweaking from the boys in the motorsport division have transformed this car into a chariot of the gods.
So let's talk for a minute about this 3.2 litre straight six that peaks at around 7,500 revs. Now there's 321 brake horsepower packed in here that will get you from 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds without even having to change up into third. There really is a seemingly never-ending thrust of power coming from this engine that sounds absolutely incredible and just seems to go on and on until you reach 155 miles per hour and the limiter kicks in and spoils all the fun.
To keep up with old Looney Tunes, you better be behind the wheel of, at the very least, a 911. Behind the wheel, it smiles all round. The stiffness of the chassis brings such amazing levels of control that it's impossible not to be very impressed.
Now, if you're a real driving fanatic, you might long for BMW's wonderful sequential manual gearbox in here to play around with, but I'm sorry to have to tell you that it just won't fit. You're going to have to make do instead with an excellent 5-speed manual, which is, I promise you, it's still loads of fun. Now, I suppose the question about the M Coupe is, does the price tag justify the driving experience? I reckon yes, it does. It really is a fantastic car. And for me, the icing on the cake is its unusual looks. It does draw gasps, stares, waves everywhere that it goes. I just love it.
In fact, I can only think of one downside to owning the M Coupe. The rather large amounts of money you'd spend on hiring out a test track, just so you can get the most out of the feeling you get when your foot hits that pedal.
Almost 10 years after launching the original Vauxhall Frontera, they've brought a second generation to an even more crowded 4x4 market. But one quick glance at the new Frontera and it looks very similar to the first. Actually, that's quite deliberate. The Vauxhall Frontera owners liked the way it was, in the same way that the Discovery owners didn't want their new Land Rover Discovery to have any radical changes. But the main area to concern with the Vauxhall Frontera always was reliability. Well, that improved with the new model. More on that later. But the general look, it's much curvier. You've got new headlights at the front, and in fact, every panel is different. Well, the tailgate opens nice and wide to get your stuff in. It's a reasonably large boot area. We've got our video equipment in there today, although it should fit in there being lightweight video equipment. One good thing about the Frontera area, you've got plenty of little hooks and straps to secure your load. Extremely important if you are going off-roading and not just standing still in a supermarket car park like we are today. But there again, you're more likely to see these in a supermarket car park, aren't you? But that's a different story. Closing it, something of worry here. Notice that, the wobble. Should we do that again? Action replay. We noticed this at the launch. This is basically the cover for the spare wheel. Now, that's not going to come off or anything, but it does harm the perceived image of quality. It's a shame. Now, inside there's definitely been some work done to improve things. Now, the whole of the dash area has been neatened up considerably, certainly very inoffensive, and it seems quite ergonomic at first glance. The plastic's a little bit hard, although I must admit that the velour cloth used on both the seats and on the door panels, it's good quality stuff. Well, sitting ahead of you, the instrument cluster is logical. To the right of the steering wheel is this neat cluster of switches to control all your lights and the heated wing mirrors. And to the left is this switch, which activates the four-wheel drive, and that illuminates a little symbol on the instrument cluster. And to the left of this, the heater controls. But why are they up here when the stereo and navigation controls are down at the bottom? Which one are you more likely to use? I think somehow the radio, and I think the radio should be up high so that your eyes are not taken off the road. The left knob switches on and controls volume, and the right, depending on what mode you're in, operates the sat-nav, radio tuner and screen display. And if you want to change your CD, you push this little tiny little button here, you move the face of your cover, and there it is. Now, it took our researcher 10 minutes to find the CD player. Thank you very much, Phillips. Well, between the seats are a couple of nice sturdy cup holders and a cubby under your armrest as well. And in the back you get cup holders outside both rear seats, and up top you get a large sunroof front and rear to add some light to this otherwise rather dark and gloomy cabin. Now, since this is a test about the urban environment, we're not going to worry about the mud plugging capabilities. We're actually going to look at the turning circle, getting out of an all-important supermarket car park space, and it's not bad at all. The actual turning circle of the Frontera is flipping marvellous. And the advantage of this shape, you can see all four corners. It's great, although those large C-posts behind do create rather a bit of a blind spot. I don't understand why they're still so thick if there isn't actually the removable roof anymore, which is a bit of a pain. The huge wing mirrors are also a boon, and they actually fold away when not needed as well. The gear change has a very long throw, and it doesn't like to be rushed at all. But there again, if you are after a sports car, well, you shouldn't be after a 4x4 in the first place, should you? Now, moving off, you get no complaints whatsoever from the revised petrol 2.2 engine. It is a willing performer, but there's actually no hiding. It's pulling a fair old weight when it comes down to it. And especially when accelerating hard, the old slow gear change
becomes very irritating then. The gearing is actually quite high, 80 miles an hour, 3,500 revs fifth gear. Not bad, I suppose, but on the motorway, boy, it doesn't accelerate very well at all. It's extremely pedestrian. It does kind of bug you, but there again, this is meant to be a 4x4 off-roader and not a motorway cruiser. Everything is a compromise with every car you buy. Well, one of the claims of this new Frontera that it is meant to be 50% quieter. I'm not quite sure how they worked that figure out, but our experience does show a definite improvement in the cabin interior sound. And we hear a muted tyre hum and the engine only becomes rough and raucous at high revs. Otherwise it is quite good. Well, from first impressions, I must say that Vauxhall have put a lot of effort into improving the Frontera's build quality. It's quite pleasant to drive. They've certainly rounded off some of the nasty square corners, but it still looks very attractive. Now, Vauxhall are putting the Frontera smack between the Land Rover Discovery and the Freelander. But this time round, the market is much more crowded, it is much more competitive, and it will only survive if it can dispel those images from the Mark I Frontera of those nasty reliability problems. We wish it well.
Vauxhall's answer to a higher level of class competition has been to upgrade the Corsa range with extra features majoring on security and comfort. The GLS, for example, gains nearly £800 worth of extra kit, including power steering, central locking, driver's airbag and new trim. This brings the price to £9,495. With so much bad news surrounding British car manufacturers, some good news from the northeast. Nissan's Sunderland plant has started a recruiting drive seeking 800 new workers to build the replacement to the Almera. The production line is already being installed, proving Nissan's commitment to their Tyneside factory. Despite new models from rival manufacturers, the Peugeot 106 is the best-selling city car. According to figures by the SMMT, sales reached a record 51,000 in 1998, the Zest version accounting for nearly half of those. Journalists predicted the launch of the 206 would dent 106 sales, but the high number of Zest 106 sold proves Peugeot got their strategy right. Next week on Motor Week, Ginny Buckley is in Barcelona for a drive of the new Honda HR-V, and Richard Hammond takes a look at Saab's 9.5 estate next week on Motor Week.